Hello everyone and welcome to Azam Sharp Weekly, and in this video I'm going to go and explain to you the whole process, the complete process of authentication in a SwiftUI app when you're using JSON Web Tokens, also known as JWT. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, we need to learn what exactly is JWT and how can you authenticate using JWT in an iPhone app. So let's say that we have an iPhone app and we have the login screen and we want to authenticate against a server. So our iPhone app is going to send a request to the server, and that request may look something like this. It will be a login request, method post with body consisting of username and password. Now the server can be anything. I mean, it can be created in Vapor, it can be created in PHP or ASP.NET, or in our case, we will implement it in Node and ExpressJS, but it can be any server. And that server is going to respond to you with some sort of a response telling you whether you're authenticated or not, success true or false. Obviously, the response can be different based on different criteria. Okay, so this is good. Now, the question is, if we are on an account screen and we are communicating with the server and we are saying that, hey, give us all my accounts, the server has no way of knowing that you already have been authenticated or not, because the URL is not a guarantee. I mean, URL can be released or it can be shared with someone else. And if other people are going to go to accounts, well, they can get the accounts. So there is no way to tell that it is the same user who is performing these requests and trying to get all the different accounts. So we need to find out how can we authenticate a user. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can do this with JSON Web Tokens. The login screen will remain the same. It's going to go ahead and send a request, which will consist of the username and password. The server is going to return you a response, but in that response, along with the success true or false, it's also going to, if the success is true, meaning you have been authenticated, then we are also going to get a token. Now, this is called the JSON Web Token, and it is created by the server and it is sent to the client. It is the client's responsibility to save that token somewhere. So we will save the token in an iPhone app, in user defaults, or any other place that we can gather it again. All right. Now, let's say that once we have the token, once we are done with the login screen, and we are saying that, hey, we want all the accounts, then every single time we want a protected resource like our accounts and maybe our update profile screen and something related to a protected resource, meaning in order to get that resource, you need to be authenticated. The iPhone app or your client needs to send a request, but in the request, they also need to send in the token. And you can see that you can send the token in many different ways, but the common idea is to set the token in the headers under the key for authorization, and the token is separated by a word bearer. Bearer simply means that this client is a bearer of the token, and the token will be after the bearer. It's basically a string separated by a space. But the important thing to remember is that whenever you are trying to access some protected resource from the server, like your accounts or you're updating your profile, you need to send this particular token in the request to the server so that the server can actually validate it. Once the server validates the token and you're good, then the server is like, okay, I know this person because the token has been validated and looks like it's a good token, so I'm going to go ahead and return you whatever you're requesting, which in this case will be some sort of account. This also means that any future request that you're going to do, maybe you're trying to update your profile, you always need to send a token so that the server can validate you. Once again, the server is going to validate you, and if it's successful, then the server is going to tell you that, okay, well, it looks like the token is validated, so I have updated your profile. So this whole process is basically how the JWT or JSON Web Tokens works in an iPhone app. And this is the same process that you will use if you are writing an Android app or a Flutter app or a React app. Basically, any app that is passing data as JSON and getting data as JSON, that uses JWT for authentication. So now we have learned the basics of how these things work. Let's go ahead and dive into the implementation and see that how we can implement JWT in a SwiftUI app with our own custom server. All right, everyone. So now that you have learned about the process of JSON Web Tokens and how you can use JSON Web Tokens to authenticate, let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first thing we need to do is to create the server, and you have infinite number of choices. You can go ahead and create your server in Vapor. You can create your server in PHP, in Django, ASP.NET Web APIs, Ruby on Rails. I'm going to go ahead and create my server in NodeJS using ExpressJS, which is using the JavaScript framework. Now, you can go ahead and install Node on your machine and do it, but I'm going to use glitch.com and create a Node Express application, which will come with this code. So this one is right now simply saying that we will get the Express package, we will initialize it, and we are running our server. And just to show you how easy it is to write in Express, I can go ahead and create a get route, which can simply say foo request response. And I can simply go ahead and send a response in JSON if I want to, which can be a message, hello world. All right. So this means that I can go to a route called /foo and I will get JSON, which is simply saying hello world. And the good thing about Glitch is that whenever I save, it will automatically save and basically restart the server. So I can go over here and change the URL, and I can simply say foo. And you can already see that it is returning you hello world in JSON. All right. Okay. Now, obviously, we don't really need foo. We need to log in the user. The first thing I would do is I need to install a package so that I can create the JSON Web Token. So if you go to the package.json file and click on Add Package, you can search for a package called JSON Web Token, and that's the package that you need, and you can install this package by just clicking on it. I have already installed this package, as you can see right there. So I'm ready to go and ready to use JSON Web Token to create a token that I will eventually send it to the client, which will be my iPhone app. I have implemented or added the package JSON Web Token. Now I'm using it. So now I can use the JWT instance to perform the signing of the token and other stuff associated with creating the token. I'm not going to use an actual database for our example. Instead of a database table, I'm going to create a users array, which will only have one user with a username and a password. Next step, I'm going to go ahead and create the login route where anyone can post data. So login route will be login. We will get the request. We will get the response. And using the login route, which is to post the data, username and login, I should be able to extract out username and login of the user. So request.body.username, and for password, request.body.password. Now you can go ahead and add some validation to it that people are passing the username and password and it's not null. That is something that you can do. Since we are posting JSON, we have to also add a body parser so that our Express package or Express framework will be able to parse JSON. So here is the body parser to parse JSON. This means that Express will be able to parse the username and password from the body that you are sending it. Now the next step is to find a user matching the username and password in our array. So we're using array as our database, but obviously in your actual app, you will be using an actual database. So I'm going to go ahead and say auth user, which means authenticated user. And then I can say users.find. Find is a helper array function. User, where user.username is matching the username, and user.password is matching the password. And find function is always going to return you one particular element if it finds that particular user. Now we can say that if we are able to find the user, if the user is authenticated, then we need to generate a token. And this will be the JSON Web Token, which we are going to generate using JWT. Once we have created the token, we can return it to the client. But the question is, well, how do we create the token? We're going to use the JWT to create the token. So jwt.sign, and what we want to put in the token is something that we can use to identify that user, and that thing is a username. And this token will also have a secret key, which you will use to unlock the token. Now, whatever you put inside the token is make sure that that is not a sensitive data. So don't put social security number, passport number, credit card number, and passwords into the token, because anyone can decode this token. Next, we will get the token. And once we get the token, we will see that if we got the token, and if we were able to get the token, we will simply go ahead and respond with JSON, sending in the token. Else, if we are not able to get the token, then we are going to go ahead and say a response. And we don't really want to tell the user too much about the token and stuff, so we're just going to say authentication failed. And we can also go ahead and add another key, which is success is false. For the other part, which is if the user is not authenticated, if the user is not even available, then also we can do the same thing, meaning authentication failed. Probably their username or password doesn't even match. So there we go. And this will be our login route that we can use to authenticate the user against the name in the user's array. And then if the user is authenticated, we will generate the token and we will return the token to the user. Let's go ahead and try to run this using Postman to see that if our server is working or not. All right, so now let's go ahead and test it out. I'm going to use a software called Postman. This is a Mac app, which you can download for free. And this is going to allow us to perform a network request. It is always a good idea to test your backend, to test your endpoints using a networking tool rather than some sort of a client or a UI that you're implementing yourself, because using this tool, we can easily detect if there are any problems with our code. So the first thing I'm going to set is post, and you can see that there are multiple options for HTTP methods. Then I'm going to go ahead and set the URL. You can see that the URL is now going to the login endpoint, which is going to match up with our endpoint right over here. And you can get the complete URL by clicking on change URL and getting the root URL, and you can add login over here. Let's go back. In the headers, we're going to set the content type to application JSON so that we can tell the server that we are sending JSON. And in the body, we have selected raw because we are passing in raw JSON. And over here, we have written valid raw JSON, which has a username John Doe and password is password123. If you look over here, we have the same thing. We have the John Doe and password123. So hopefully it will match up and it will give us a JSON Web Token. Let's go ahead and send the request. And I believe we got something back, and here we go. We got the token. You can see that this is what the token looks like. So this means that when we are sending the correct username and password, we are able to get a token. That token will be sent to the client side, which will be our SwiftUI app. And then SwiftUI can hold on to that token, probably in a user default, so that it can send it in the future request. If I go ahead and change the username to something else and send it, I get authentication failed. So that's good. And if I go ahead and change the password also, it gets the same result. But if I send in the correct username and password, I get the token. So it looks like this is working fine. We are able to generate the token. Now the next step for us would be to implement the SwiftUI part, which is going to use this URL, get the token, and then put the token somewhere so that it can access it again, probably in user defaults. All right, so now let's go ahead and take a look at our client side, which means our SwiftUI application. I've already built some part of the application. It's mostly the user interface, as you can see on the right-hand side. We will add the text boxes later on. The first thing we need to do is to create some sort of a service layer which is going to allow us communicate with this service, which is this particular route. So we are going to be passing in the username and password, and we will get back some sort of an authentication token. This will be our JSON Web Token. So I'm going to go to my web service, and you can see the web service doesn't really have anything. So let's go ahead and write some code to get the web service working. The first thing we need to do is to create the login function. So login, where user can actually go ahead and pass in a username as well as a password. And we are going to use the result type in Swift. So I'm going to go ahead and say completion and escaping result type, which is string. So it's going to return us a token, which will be a string, or it is going to return us some sort of an error. I'm just going to call this authentication error. Maybe the authentication actually failed. And we are also going to make sure, let's go ahead and put it in a round bracket, and also make sure that this closure doesn't really return anything. So this is how it looks like. There is no such thing as authentication error, so we have to build that enum ourselves. That is when authentication actually fails. So I'm going to go ahead and say authentication error, which is of type error. And one of the things we will have over here will be invalid credentials, and other thing will be a custom message, which you can pass in anything you want. So I'm just going to say error message, which will be string. This will be our custom case. Let's go ahead and build it. Okay, that's fine. Now we need to go ahead and implement the web service login function. So this is our client. This is our SwiftUI application. The first thing we need is a URL. So I'm going to go ahead and get the URL. There we go. After we get the URL, you can see that if the URL actually failed, then we're going to go ahead and say error message URL is incorrect. If it passes, then we have to do something about it. Well, we have the login username and we have the password, so we need to construct a body based on the username and password. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and create a separate structure that is going to allow me to create a particular body. And I will call it login request body. This means that I can simply go ahead and populate the username and password, and I can be done with it. So let body equals to login request body, passing in the username and password, which is username and some sort of a password. This login request body is also codable. This means that I can encode it and decode it, but usually we'll be encoding it since we have to pass it using our URL session or along with a network call. Next, we need to construct some sort of a request. So I'm going to go ahead and add a request. There we go. The request is based on the URL that is being passed, which is right there. It is a post request, and one of the HTTP headers that we're adding is application JSON for content type. The other thing that we need to add is the actual request body, and luckily we can now use JSON encoder .encode, and we can encode the body that we created on line number 29. We can go ahead and call this with a try optional because it can blow up. All right. So next, what we want to do, we want to perform the actual request, and that will be done by URL session.shared.data task with request. Because we do have the request, we can pass in the request, we can get a completion handler with some sort of a data, some sort of a response, and some sort of an error, hopefully not. And don't forget to call resume. This is the number one thing people forget, to call resume, and then they're like, well, we're not getting any data back. The first thing we need to do is now to extract out the data. So let's go ahead and extract out the data. If there is no data, then we're going to pass in no data. Next, we need to go ahead and decode our response. So you can see over here, the response that we are getting is something that can have a token, and it can also have a message and a success false, or success, well, success true or false, I guess. So what should we do over here? Well, what we can do is we can construct a login response. So let me go ahead and construct a login response body. And using the login response body, we can go ahead and populate this. There might be a much better way of doing things over here, but for now, we're just going to construct our login response, or decode it into login response. If it is failed, then we're just going to say invalid credentials. Now we have the login response, and from the login response, we can go ahead and get the token out. So token equals to login response dot token. Else, if the token is not found, then we can fire completion with a failure, and we can go ahead and say that this is invalid credentials because probably your username or password was incorrect. Finally, we can go ahead and call completion with a success and passing in the token. So this is going to at least give us the token, and the person who is calling this will be able to get that token. Now, who will be the person calling this particular thing? That will be the login view model. So now let's go ahead and construct our login view model. The login view model will have the username and password. So I'm going to go ahead and put the username and password. The login view model will also have a login function. In the login function, we can use the web service dot login, passing in the login username and a particular password. We will get some sort of a completion back, which will be a result. And this result will be of type result type, which can have a success or the failure. So we can perform a switch on it because result type is an enum. We will get the case for success. We will get the token. So we will get the token. And we can go ahead, and once we get the token, let's go ahead and simply print out the token. And for failure, we will get some sort of a authentication error. So let's go ahead and call this error. And then error.localized description. All right. Now we need to make sure that we are calling the login view model, and we are calling the login function. So wherever you want to call the login view model, that is up to you, but we already have our content view defined where we can go ahead and call that login view model. So the first thing I'm going to do is construct a login view model instance. Then in the text field, we want to populate, whenever we type something in the text field, we want our login view model username property to be populated. And then when you click that, we will say login view model.login. Perfect. Let's go ahead and give it a try. Let's go ahead and run this. So I'm going to go ahead and run the app. And now we have text boxes, so we can go ahead and enter something, John Doe, and password is password. If I try to log in right now, it is going to say authentication error, which basically means that it's not able to generate that. And the problem might be in the username, John Doe, because over here you can see our username is something else, which is John Doe with a small j. So what we want to do is we want to compare the left-hand side and the right-hand side to be equal. And this is JavaScript, so we can simply go ahead and say to lowercase, which I believe is a function, and the same thing on the left side also, over here, whatever the user has provided. So hopefully now it will match. Let's go ahead and save it. All right, so after making that change, let's go back to our code and try to run it again. Let's go ahead and enter John Doe. Now, weirdly enough, it is allowing me to write with small letters, which is kind of weird. And password 123. And there we go. So it looks like our token has been generated. You can see that the token is right there. That is great. And we printed out the token right there. But what we want to do with the token is we want to save the token. This is our authentication token. So we want to save the token so that the next time we are requesting something, we are saying that, hey, give me all my accounts. We have to send this token again and again. This token is our validity. This token is kind of like our access to the different resources that are available on the server. So let's go ahead and see that how we can go ahead and do that. Now there are many different places you can store the token. I'm just going to go ahead and store the token in a user defaults. I'm just going to go ahead and get the access to user defaults, which is user defaults.standard. And right over here, I can go ahead and say defaults.setValue. Passing in the value, what will be the value of the token? It will be the actual token. What will be the key? Well, I can just say JSON Web Token, and you can use any key that you want. All right. Now, the other thing that we want to do is we want to tell the user, meaning the user interface, that the authentication has been successful. So I'm going to go ahead and create another field over here, and I will call it is authenticated, which will be a Boolean. Initially, it will be false. And we will mark this with published because whenever we want to change or assign this property, we want the user interface to get a notification that, hey, you should do something about it. And since we are on the background queue, so I'm going to go ahead and switch to the main queue and assign is authenticated equals to true, which basically means that we are authenticated. Make sure that you're using self over here. Great. So this is pretty good. Now let's go to the content view and check out our interface. Okay, so based on the authentication, this lock over here is going to change. So initially when we are not authenticated, this lock should be open. But if we are authenticated, then this lock should be locked or closed. So we can go ahead and do that by saying login viewmodel.isAuthenticated. If the person is authenticated, then the lock is filled, or else the lock is not filled, and we can say lock.open. So you can see that right now it's open. All right. Let's go ahead and run this and see if the lock closes once we are authenticated. So I'm going to go ahead and say John Doe, not Johnson. John Doe. Password. And didn't really do anything. Okay, let's go ahead and run it in this browser over here, I mean in the simulator, and try to see what's going on. John Doe. I think I may have entered the password wrong. Password 123. There we go. It's locked, meaning we are authenticated. Great. So this means that we are authenticated and the user has actually logged in. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to get all the accounts of the user. So let's just say that there is some resource online from our server that we want to get access to, but only and only if the user is authenticated. So if I click on get account right now, it's not really going to do anything because we don't even have a service over here that returns anything regarding the accounts. So right now we're just going to hard code it. meaning we will try to get the service from somewhere and we will simply use that. So I'm just going to go ahead and add some accounts over here. In actual application, real application, you will get that data from your database, but we are just going to have accounts and we're just going to return those accounts. So on the server, we will go ahead and create a route that is going to give us access to the accounts. I'm just going to go ahead and say this route is based on accounts or is available on the accounts. And what we're going to do is response.json, because we want to return JSON, and we will return all the accounts, which are hard-coded, as you can see on line number 12. Right now, anyone can access this. Anyone. Because just a link, or it's just a URL or endpoint. So anyone who has this particular URL, they can access the account, which is not good. So what we want to do is we want to authenticate the user. And I will like to authenticate for different URLs or endpoints also. So I'm going to create, which in Node is called the middleware. So let's go ahead and create a middleware, authenticate, request, response, and next. And a couple of different things we're going to check. We're going to check that if the client, which is our iPhone application, is sending the token or not. That's the first thing we're going to check. Though that token will be inside the headers or authorization header tag. So I'm just going to go ahead and say headers and give me authorization. So authorization is basically a header key, and we're looking for headers. Once we get the headers, then we're going to go ahead and say, okay, give me the token then. So token equals to headers.split. And I'm going to show you that why we are doing the split, but right now we're splitting it and taking the first portion of it. And the reason that we're splitting it is that we will be sending the token something like this, bearer, and then the token. So I'm just going to type some random stuff out. So this, let's say this is a token. The bearer basically means that this is a JSON Web Token. I mean, it's not, you can remove the bearer and it will still work, but bearer is usually the person who is bearing the token, which in this case will be the iPhone app or the client. Next up, we have the token. Let's go ahead and decode the token. Decoded version of the token. We will use jwt.verify. And in the verify, we are going to go ahead and pass in the token. And remember the secret key, which was secret, I think, in our case, when we created the token, we're going to pass that also. So you can see right over here, when we created the token, we created the key, which is needed to decode the token. Once again, whatever you put in the token is not a secure thing, so don't start putting your passport number, social security, credit card number, passwords into the token. It can be decoded, so don't do that. All right, so now we will go ahead and get the persisted user from the token. So what is that? Well, hold on a second. First, we get the username, I guess. So username from the token, which will be decoded.username. So where is this decoded.username coming from? Well, if you go and look at when we signed the token, you saw that in the token, when we signed, we added a username property, a username object, an object with a property called username. And that is exactly what we're trying to get it out. So we're saying decoded.username. Once we have the username, we need to find out that if that username actually exists. So I'm going to go ahead and say persisted user, where users.find and user, this will be done against your database, but since we don't have a database, I'm just going to go ahead and do it over here. User name equals to the username. All right. So whatever the decoded username was, we are going to check against that. Now we can say if the persisted user existed, meaning we were able to get the user and that user actually exists, I'm going to go ahead and call next. Next basically means that continue with the request. So this is a middleware, and all the requests are going to go through the middleware, and if you call next, then it's going to go to the original request. Else, if there is no user, then too bad, we can't really do anything. well, probably you are not authorized. So I'm just going to go ahead and say unauthorized access. And the other case where the headers are not present, which I believe is over here, we are again going to do the same thing, because if the headers are not there and you don't have the token, then you are not authorized also. Now we do want to call the authenticate middleware when you're going to the accounts. So I'm just going to go ahead and add it over here, which means that authenticate is going to get called whenever you're going to the accounts. So accounts needs authentication. All right. Cool. So we have this, and whenever you create any kind of an action or an endpoint in your Node application, it is always a good idea to check it using Postman. So let's go ahead and check it using Postman. All right, so this is our Postman. We are sending in John Doe password 123. You can look at the URL. We're trying to log in, and we are using the post request. Let's go ahead and send it. And we get a token. Okay, that's good. We will need that token to send it again to get our accounts. So let's go ahead and open up a new one. And I'm going to copy this whole URL again, but you know that I'm trying to get the accounts. There we go. If I just try to get the accounts and send it, it just says unauthorized access, which is good because we have not sent out the token. So now I'm going to go to the headers and add the key or another header, which is called authorization. And now I need the token. So let's go ahead and get the token. This is the token. And we are going to send it like bearer and then the name of the token. Oh no, we're again getting unauthorized access. Okay, so we need to see what's going on over here. Is the space and everything correct? So let's go back and see what we are doing wrong. And I found out that we were not comparing it with the two lowercase. So I added the two lowercase over here. Let me go ahead and remove these two lines. And now hopefully it should work. Let's go and perform the request. And there we go. So we were able to get the accounts for that particular user. We all know it's hard-coded accounts, not real accounts. And if I go over here and somebody goes over here and try to mess around with the token. So if I go over here and change the token, just even one word, instead of E, I will say R. And now you can see that the token is not valid. All right. Now this error should not happen. We should catch this. This is not good that it's actually blowing up. So let's go back and see what we are doing wrong. So the first thing we should do over here is that we should say if decoded correctly. If it is decoded, and only then when it is decoded, we should be able to get the username. So username is equals to decoded.username. And once we get the username, we should be able to get the persistent user. So let's remove that from over here. Once we get the persistent user, then perhaps we can go ahead and do something else. So if this is a persisted user, if it exists, then we will say, okay, the person is actually logged in, so let them go to the place where they want it to go. Else, we will simply go ahead and say response.json and message, and we can say unauthorized access. All right. Oops. And if the decoding is not successful, then, well, something bad happened again with the token. Probably you mess around with the token or something. So let's go ahead and do that also. So there are a number of places where it can actually go bad. And then finally, if the headers were not found, then we will also do the same thing. Let's go back, perform a request. We are still, for some reason, getting this weird stuff. Invalid token. I mean, we are passing a token. Let me go ahead and pass a correct token, E. Okay, so if I mess around with the token, let's say instead of Y, I would say E. I'm not sure where that error, invalid token. All right, so somewhere over here it is messing up. Maybe it's in the verify or somewhere. So it is getting the token. I believe it is getting the token, but then after that, it is messing it up. So it's just saying invalid token instead of just returning something, which is kind of weird. Let's see what's going on. Invalid token, invalid token. So basically the same thing is going again and again. I wonder if it even goes, if it doesn't go over here, then it will simply do this and end it. Somewhere I'm missing something. All right, we can go and check that later on. Right now, if we set the correct token, which is, I believe, EY, right? EY, then we get something back. So now in the client side, we have to make sure that when we are trying to get the accounts, we are passing in this token plus the bearer. So now let's go and move to the client side. So the first thing we need to do is go to the web service. And you can see the web service currently only has one function, which is for login, and it doesn't really do anything with getting all the accounts. So let's go ahead and find out the service which is going to get all the accounts. Function get all accounts. We are going to pass in the token and a completion handler, which should retain memory. Result. What we are going to return will be an array of account, and the error can be anything. I guess in this case, we'll just call it network error. Do we have a network error over here? If we don't, we'll create it. Don't worry about it. Okay. Maybe right now we don't have network error. Let's go ahead and create one, like a very simple one. Enum for network error, which will be of type error, and it will have invalid URL. It should have no data maybe, and then maybe even it has a decoding error. All right, okay. Now in get all accounts, we are going to go ahead and first of all construct a URL. In the URL, we are going to, this time, we can go ahead and say invalid URL. Great. Next up, we are going to create a request, which we have done last time also using the URL request object. This time, the one change that we will have to do is in the request, in the headers, we have to set a header for authorization, because our server, as you can see, is looking for that particular authorization header. And specifically, it is looking for the token. So we have to set it in the way bearer, space, and the token. So let's go ahead and do request dot add value for the header. The value of the header will be the token, and for the particular field, well, that will be authorization. Now over here, we're using authorization with a capital A, but when we're extracting, we're using it for the small a. I think in Express, it always try to extract it using the small or lowercase letters. Okay. Now we can go ahead and perform our URL session and all that stuff. So URL session .share.data task with a URL. This one, request. Pass in the request. We get the data. We get the response, and we get the error. Let's go ahead and call resume so that we can send the request. Okay, this is going to give us opportunity to get the data. We will get the data. If there is any problem, then we will go ahead and say no data. Probably we didn't really get anything. All right, so if we get the data, let's go ahead and format that a little bit. If we get the data, we want to decode it. So JSON decoder dot decode, And we are going to decode the array of accounts because that is exactly what we're getting. And we are decoding data. We are going to use try optional, and then we will say accounts. We'll get it into accounts. We'll unwrap it also. And if the decoding fails, then we're going to again say decoding error. And finally, we can go ahead and fire completion with success and the accounts data. There we go. So this will be our get all accounts. You can only get all accounts if you pass in a valid token, or else you're not going to get anything. All right. Now, one of the things you will see over here is that we do have the account list view model, but it's completely blank. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that account list view model will be responsible for getting all the accounts. And each individual account will be represented by account view model, which is a structure right there. So that on the interface, we will only get the account view model. Okay. So over here, we'll have to create a function called getAllAccounts, get all accounts. And this is inside account list view model. So the first thing we need to do is to get the user defaults dot standard. And the reason we are doing that is we need to get the token. If we don't have the token, well, then we are not really authorized to do anything. Let's go ahead and say defaults, not default. So defaults dot string for a particular, not array, string for a key. And the key, I believe that we said, is JSON Web Token. Else return it. Next, we will call the web service dot get all accounts, passing in the token. We will get some sort of a result back. Based on the result, we can go ahead and switch on the result. It will be either success or failure. So if the case is success, we will get the accounts and we can do something with it. Let's go ahead and right now just say print accounts. The other thing will be the failure. We will get some sort of the error, which will be a network error, and we can take a different action for an error. Okay. So now when we actually get the accounts, we want to populate an array of account view models so that we can send it to the screen. So that's why we have created an array called accounts, which is of account view model. And we can go ahead and access this account. So I'm going to go ahead and say, since we are on the background thread right now, we're just going to go ahead and say switch it to the main one. And I'm going to say self.accounts equals to accounts.map and account view model.init. So we'll get all the stuff, and that should do it. All right. The final thing that we need to do is to make sure that we can actually see the account. You can see over here, if I press the get account, it's not really doing anything. So let's go back to our page. And the first thing I'm going to go ahead and add is the account list view model. And right over here, when we're calling the get accounts, I will call account list view model dot get all accounts. This will only work if you have a token, or else it will not work. For the sign out, I will go ahead and probably remove all the accounts and also call sign out function on the login view model. There is no sign out function on the login view model, so let's go ahead and see how we can implement the sign out. Sign out will be very simple. We're just going to remove the token, and that's pretty much it. We will simply remove the token and set the is authenticated to false. All right, let's go ahead and build it to see if there is any error. No errors, that's good. We still need to display a list of accounts, and let's see how we can do that. And we only want to display a list if we actually are authenticated and if the accounts count is greater than 1. So here is some code that can be used to display the accounts. You can see it's not really doing much. It's just checking over here if the accounts count is greater than 1. Then we will simply display the accounts. By the way, this section over here can be created as a separate view if you want. Now, one of the things that you have to be very careful about is when you're adding the authorization header, we're only passing the token. But on the server side, we are performing a split, and it was expected that you will be passing in some word called bearer, which we are not. So it's not going to work. So make sure that you're passing it correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and say over here bearer, and then the second part will be the token. So bearer space token. The history of bearer. So bearer over here is basically just to represent that this person is a bearer, this client is a bearer of this token. All right. And let's go ahead and run this. Now, since I'm running the app again and again, I actually do have the user defaults set up, and I should have the token in the user defaults. So I should be able to do something. Let's go ahead and first log in, because I still have to log in at least. So I'm going to say John Doe, password 123. I'm going to log in. And there we go. I can see all the different accounts. If I sign out, those things are gone. My accounts are gone. If I try to say get accounts, now at this point when I signed out, I actually removed the token also. Token is gone. It's no longer in user defaults. So now if I click on get accounts, it's not going to do anything. I must be signed in. There we go. I'm signed in. And now I can get my accounts. So that is the JSON Web Token and authentication in the SwiftUI app using JSON Web Token. So now you should have an idea of how JSON Web Token works. So every single thing that you're doing, which is secure, or you want to protect the resource, let's say that you are trying to update an account, you're trying to get all the accounts that you have, you're trying to update your profile, you're trying to deposit money or withdraw money or whatever, anything that a resource that requires some sort of authentication, you are sending your token. Now again, I've signed out, the token is gone. The token is gone. This means that if I'm going to perform a GET request, I'm not sending the token. So now I will log in, and now if I perform a request, I get it. So it only works if I am authenticated and if I'm sending the token. So hopefully this really long video has helped you understand how the JSON Web Authentication actually works and how it can be utilized when your client is an iPhone app or an iPad app or a Flutter app or Android app, or it can even be a React website app or a web app. And if you are communicating over JSON, you mean passing the JSON and getting back JSON, then JSON Web Token, JWT, is the preferred way of performing authentication, and that's exactly what we have done. Thank you so much, and I really hope that you have enjoyed this long tutorial. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to support my channel, then the best way would be to check out my courses on Udemy. You can see that I have just published a brand new course on core data in iOS. This was just released a couple of days ago, and it already has a lot of different students, a lot of great reviews, so definitely check it out. If you are learning SwiftUI, then check out my beginner's course for SwiftUI declarative interfaces for any Apple device. And you can see that I have other bestsellers also, as well as MVVM design pattern in iOS, as well as Firebase, Flutter, combined data structures. And I also published a brand new course, which is not really a development course, but it will show you how you can earn extra income on the side using development. So you can earn up to $50,000 a year. $50,000 a year if you take this course. There are a lot of things I discuss in this course. So definitely check out all of these courses. And once again, thank you so much for all your support. I really appreciate your support. The links for all of these courses will be right there in the YouTube description. So definitely thank you so much.